It's that time. Your fix is here. College football is a year-round discussion with these two. Here's JC and Morgan. Mike Morgan of ESPN and JC Sherbert of 24/7 Sports have you covered. Beginning right now.
Welcome, everybody, once again. It is JC and Morgan, March Madness style. In fact, the final installment, number 189, if you're scoring at home, of the month of March before we delve into April and we talking spring football and everything else. But it's that time of year where we not only do our own thing, a couple of dueling soliloquies at times mixed in with some dialogue and good stuff, but we also like to get guest heavy this time of year. And, I mean, we've been fortunate to have a number of tremendous guests. I don't even know who we're missing at this point. But this is the distinguished first three-timer in terms of JC and Morgan. That's right. They used to have that on SNL, as I like to say, back when the show was funny and relevant. When Tom Hanks was on, like that, he was part of the five-timer club. Well, Tim Brando, is now the first of the three-timer club. And who knows, maybe the only. I don't know if anybody's going to be worthy of such a distinction. But when you have when you have Tim Brando on, he is certainly worthy. You know him. It's funny, Timmy, you and I were talking not long ago, and obviously you are a Fox guy now and do a great job covering everything that Fox has under their umbrella with football and basketball. But as I'm watching March Madness, I'm thinking of Tim Brando back in the day when I was growing up, and even during college football, when I see the CBS studio show, I still somehow think you're magically going to pop up there with Lou Holtz and do a reunion. But it never happens. Anyway, with all that being said, welcome once again. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be with both you guys, and I feel similarly about the time of year and the conversations that we have because, I've been the soundtrack for a lot of people your age and maybe a little younger and a little older, but at the same time. We all have Southern roots. So there's that background of information that you guys have on me that maybe a few others don't. So I don't have to go over, what I've done and where I've been and where I hope to go with you guys. You guys know me well enough to understand both my past, my current, and hopefully my short-term future. When you're my age, you don't think about long-term future quite as much as you used to.
Right.
But I do still have goals. I still have things I want to accomplish, and I think they're probably things that you're already aware of, and that's good. I don't have to go through that kind of stuff when I'm talking to you guys.
No, you are like so many in the business. I mean, it's the old Jimmy Valvano axiom: survive in advance, right? You keep going this crazy business. And you're one of the few that you've kind of done the holy trinity of ESPN is where many people first saw you. And I know you have ties way back before that, but for those of us that saw you on national TV, our introduction to Tim Brando was ESPN. And then, of course, I mentioned the CBS and now Fox. And I know there was Raycom and everything mixed in. I mean, we could do 3 hours on just kind of
Turner Sports.
Yes,
Sports
Turner.
Yeah,
so it's really more than the Holy Trinity, whatever that is, times 4 or 5.
It's a quad.
The Holy Quad. And I live in Atlanta and have for the last 12 years. I mean, for those that were around and remember, wasn't that long ago, you were calling Braves and Hawks games. I mean, It's an amazing career, and I know that's hard for somebody who's still in the thick of it to really reflect on and think about. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, but it's one of those things when I think about it and all the interesting career, there's a lot of people that have excelled at one thing, at one network or with one team for a long, long time. And that is certainly commendable and distinguishable. But I've always had admiration for the men and women in our business that have also been versatile and have been able to adapt to different things. And you're not just wearing the same company jacket with the same mic flag for 30 years or 40 years or doing it for one team for that long. That's great. But to be able to do what you've done when you think about it in that perspective, and I didn't even know I was going here when we signed on.
Mm-hmm.
It's the beauty of having you on. I never know where we're going to go. But it's pretty amazing when you think of all those different corners of the broad sportscasting universe that you've hit.
Yeah, well, the last real job beyond what I was doing at CBS I had when I was literally ensconced in CBS, but the other job, for years I did Raycom. In fact, all the way through Raycom stopping its syndicated ACC coverage, which was by and large the end of Raycom as a entity of broadcasting their own sports. But the Tim Brando show, which was a radio show that initially started on Sporting News Radio, went to Sirius XM, was then simulcasted on CBS Sports Network. So I could no longer do the show just commando, in a robe in my house here in this very study that I'm talking to you now from. But I had to actually go to a studio that CBS invested in and do television, a televised version of what we were doing on the radio for 3 years. And that was really wearing a lot of hats even then. And frankly, when I finally stopped doing it, and the reason I did was because I was now calling games, not doing studio primarily. Okay. Once I got to Fox and I was a full-time on the road play-by-player for both football and basketball, I realized it was just too difficult to do your best, okay, in terms of homework necessary, getting to the site, and then delivering a daily 3-hour talk show. It became cumbersome. When I was doing the studio at CBS and I would fly in on Thursday, I would go over to Mickey Mantle's and do the show from Mickey Mantle's, in Central Park South.
Nice. I've been there. Very
so
cool.
It was like one hand. I was in the window. You couldn't pass by. If you were staying at the Ritz, you couldn't walk by without seeing us. And so one hand sort of washed the other with that. But when you're trying to meet with coaches and coordinators and players, before a Saturday football game, carrying a bunch of equipment into a hotel and hoping you can get connected. I tried that for a year and it was enough. So all the guys that were working for me, my ensemble, they're all doing well and I'm happy for them. But I think the other thing too is I didn't want my legacy to be quote unquote sports talk host. I enjoyed having my own show for a period of time, but the business was kind of going in another direction, one that I did not like. And I'm really glad that I don't have to address every issue that's out there on the daily sports menu,
right?
That people are forcing guys to talk about when they really either A, don't want to talk about it, or B, don't know enough to talk about it and shouldn't be. All right. And that's what's happening, I think, in our business, particularly with sports radio and some of these other shows that we see popping up that I find deplorable on daytime TV on a regular basis, no matter the network.
No, I know exactly. So, you're right. And they're all guilty of it. And it's a play the hits, just snowman arguments / regurgitate the same stale arguments / how do we instill this political point into this?
Right.
It's the same garbage day after day after day. And look, for 14 years, I hosted a 3-hour show. I know what it's like to do shows in the dog days of summer where you're searching for topics and everything else.
Yeah.
But these are shows that are doing that in the middle of hot times of the year. And it just shows me like we've lost control of what's important to the listener in many cases. What I liked about your show is that it was the only one that at least that was, now you have Sirius XM, all college all the time, but yours was on a national TV scale that actually put a focal point on college football, college basketball year round, or at least when it was relevant. Whereas,
and even college baseball too,
and even college baseball, right, which they would never in a million years discuss on that type of platform today. Whereas now, I mean, I tune in on a Monday in the fall after a huge college football weekend, and it's like that didn't even happen because we got to hit every NFL talking point for a 3-hour show. So that's just where it is. And so the college football and basketball fan are completely underserved if they're
Big
watching studio show, those
Big
type of formats. It's a shame. You're the only one that kind of broke that mold a little bit. I don't think there's anything like that on the air today.
By example, I'll just throw this out, okay? Because yesterday, when what I thought were two incredibly enjoyable basketball games to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can say that one ended badly, and it did. You can say that another one was a tremendous comeback, and there was this explosion for a 73-year-old coach that had taken George Mason to the Final Four back in 2006, but had not been back and had not taken Miami, certainly a larger program than George Mason, to a Final Four. And so I'm thinking, okay, CBS is going right off the air for 60 minutes, which is understandable. I'm still sort of grinding, and I want to hear what other people have to say. Right. I heard what Charles and Jay and Clark were saying with Gumby in the studio at CBS, but they didn't get to spend as much time on it because they're a bridge show and another game's got to start. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, okay, well, CBS Sports Network, clearly, right? They're going to have, Zucker and that group, Wally Zerbiak, somebody. No, they had rodeo on.
Oh,
rodeo.
Wow.
Now it's a rodeo time buy, I'm sure, so they're making money on it. But there's rodeo on CBS Sports Network. So I'm like, okay, well, TBS, right? The TBS crew.
Right.
They'll have Ernie or whoever Ernie's replacement is talking. No, they're not on. They've got a show, a movie or something on TBS.
Right.
So then I'm like, okay, let's go to ESPN and ESPN. No, they got women's basketball on.
Right.
There was no place to go.
You tried True TV because True TV.
No. I think True TV after the last Friday is Werdunsky.
They had Impractical Jokers on, I think, instead.
Something
breaking
like that.
It down.
Yeah. But anyway, think about that. That, to me, this is the sporting event that's captivated all of us that love college athletics.
Right.
And at the end of the we now know who the four teams are, but I still want to grind the game that we really didn't talk about as much as I would have liked to have seen it talked about. Let's take a deeper dive on what happened at the end of that game and why it happened.
Yeah.
Nothing. And then, hey, Jim Larinaga, okay, I know he's not Dean Smith or Roy Williams. It's Miami, but this is history, what he's doing.
Sure.
So there was no place to find it. Okay. And that's just so sad to me. College athletics is still very much underserved in all forms of media. And when it is done, it's done by so many that have no experience, that they don't understand context, and they can't give you any nuggets on history and why.
Right.
Like what happened in that game. The Miami kid was spotless. He was perfect.
Right.
He had every shot from the floor. He had
9 for 9, 9 for 9, which makes you think of Leitner, 10 for 10, 10 for 10 in 92. But if you're a 28-year-old Syracuse grad, which seemed to have flooded the market because people that graduate from Syracuse are making a lot of the hiring, they don't know that. And so they stick the kid on there, and he's got to pretend because he just read it on Wikipedia. Oh, that reminds me of Leitner in 92. Yeah, sure it does, kid.
But anyway, the bottom line is it's just so sad. To me, we've regressed in our coverage of college athletics. College football is in the shadows of the NFL all fall long. Lots of pregame conversation, but once the games are over on Saturday, oh my God, it's Sunday. We're not talking to college on Sunday. College basketball it's even worse.
Yeah. And
we really only put college basketball on the front pages. And JC's more the writer than you and I would ever be. But JC, you can identify with this. We can't get to past page 6 in a major website, much less old publications that when they were still in business, until the tournament begins. And now, hell, they're not talking about it even after the regional finals are over. Right. You really have to hunt both in print as well as in electronic media. For the Final Four. It's amazing.
March Madness is still very popular, but I'll admit it's not as. I mean, when I was a kid, and even as a young adult with Timmy B, when you were doing Raycom on the ACC network, that got piped into my house every night, Wednesdays and Fridays or whenever. I watched some great games. I watched Wake Forest come back and beat North Carolina one night in Winston-Salem before they opened the new Coliseum. I'll never forget those moments. We just don't get that with basketball anymore. I mean, it's on, but and it's another thing too. I think is the fact that most things are streamed now. You can it's always on TV. It's not a special televised game when it's on TV anymore. Everything's on TV and all that good stuff. But you're right. It's college basketball it's taking a back seat. And speaking of that, one thing I love about what you cover and what you've always covered is you have this enthusiasm for things that like I kind of secretly like as somebody from the South, you wouldn't think, like Pac-12 football and Big East basketball. Like every time you call a game at the Garden, I'm like, man, I'm jealous of that guy, because that's just so special, like in the whole scheme of sport, to be in that building with that historic league, which is a great basketball league, by the way. UConn coming back in. I mean, I grew up watching that, right before March Madness and stuff. And I think that bringing that type of enthusiasm to things that maybe the masses aren't aware of or don't have appreciation for, I think that does help the sport move forward, or both sports move forward and stuff. And that's just it's rare that you get that type of great enthusiasm, and it's almost like an unspoken respect for the tradition of the game. And I do appreciate that about what you do and always have.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. That means a great deal to me. And, now my season ends, when the Big East tournament is over. I hand it off to Gus for the quarterfinal round at night. I do the first 5 games of the Big East tournament. And we had a quarterfinal game with rivalries, abound. UConn and Providence for the first quarterfinal day, and the place is packed. It sounds like the Big East championship. Providence is down 26, comes back with under 3 to play to cut it to 5 twice, and a 20. I think it was a 26-5 run. And I'm losing my voice because I've had overtime games, and I could feel it. It was one of those deals, Mike, where, when you're beginning to lose your pipes, you have to push it a little harder. You have to speak even louder. So you turn the volume meter in your ears down just a bit, so you're pushing your voice, because if you stop and you become a little more conversational, you're having to push it even more because the crowd's so loud. Right. It literally sounds like an SEC Alabama LSU game, by example, and one of the games of the city. It's that kind of crazy inside the Garden for basketball. And if I don't do that, then my voice is going to crack, and I know that. Yeah. So I immediately start talking a lot less. And I even just said at one point, the crowd's going to tell you everything. And this is with a 10-point spread with about 5.5 minutes to go. I knew if they got it to single digits, it's going to go nuts. So I just lay out, let the crowd go. And when Locke from Providence hits a 3, I just say Locke.
Right.
And I don't say a thing after that. Ball is inbounded, and the Jackson kid from Connecticut throws a lazy pass. It's intercepted by the kid Floyd, Corey Floyd. So he takes it. I just let the bucket go in. You hear the crowd go nuts. And right as the ball's going in, I go, Floyd, boom. That's it.
Yeah.
And then we go to break, and we come out, and it's a 5-point game with 3 minutes and 35 seconds left. If you roll back on your DVR, no more than 5 minutes, the spread was 22. 22. That's just unbelievable when you're doing a game like that. And, it was louder in the building then because it was a Big East game. The New England rivals, Providence and UConn, they're only an hour and 15 minutes apart. It's sort of the New England version of Duke, Carolina to them. It's not as well known, but in that part of the country, on that side of the Hudson, that's a big, big ass game. and
absolutely,
they're going nuts. And so the game ends, we go off the air, and the show that's on after us, which is one of the Embrace Debate shows, says nothing about college basketball. I mean, nothing. Now,
right.
I'm talking about my own network here, okay? I could go on and on about the four-letter network,
right?
but I don't want to do that to you, and I don't want to do that to the show. So the bottom line is there was a time in our business where we all felt like what was going on the air at a game needed to be addressed when a studio show came on. We called that seamless broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we know we're getting an audience that was watching college basketball. Let's at least make them happy by transitioning into whatever we're going to do with 5 minutes of something substantive to the sport we were just watching. We don't do that anymore.
Right.
We just, okay, what's Aaron Rodgers going to do? What's up with LeBron? Are we going to be able to see? Are they going to get along? What's going to happen with
Lamar Jackson deserves more money. And I will go after anybody's family who disagrees with me. I think, guys, what we're all talking about here, I sense this in college basketball now, and the way they treat college football. Many people do. It's almost like a Major League Baseball analogy in that people will tell you that a nationally televised baseball game between two teams, doesn't matter who the teams, obviously Yankees, Red Sox are different, but let's just say the Rangers and the Angels have star power with Ohtani and Trout.
Right.
It's not going to draw a huge number for a regular season game. Typically that just doesn't happen. And that's the way they view college basketball. And you and I are in the trenches. I mean, I'm doing an SEC game, a regular season game at Alabama this year. The crowd is packed. The fans are unbelievable. And everybody's talking about it in that footprint. But maybe nationally, I have no idea. They don't share the numbers with me. Maybe it didn't draw a great number. But but if you take like an Atlanta Braves game and you do the regional ratings, they do extremely well. Or the New York Yankees, the New York market, extremely well. So we've treated it as just a niche within a niche, just a regional sport. The national public can't handle the relevance of that unless it's right in their own backyard. That's the way I look at the coverage of college basketball in particular.
Yeah. Well, as an example, if we went back and transcribed, all that was said on these so-called Embrace Debate shows, all right, that are out there on all the cable outlets that, except for the conference networks, I will give much credit to those at the SEC network and the Big Ten network and the ACC network for, taking care of their fans, because they do. But just because they do, and companies like the one I work for and the one you work for are responsible for that, it almost seems like they said, okay, well, that's their space. We're not even going to discuss that on Fox or FS1 or ESPN. That's what they're deciding.
Right.
And I say, wait a minute. No, there's got to be a little more balance to this. And I think that's, for me anyway, the thing that I have a hard time getting past. If we were to transcribe this, fellas, think about this. You did, I don't know, how many games did you do of Alabama's? 4, 5?
Oh gosh, probably this year like 7 or 8, because they were so relevant. They were good, and it made for great television. Right.
So anyway, that, and then from the time the tragedy occurred in Tuscaloosa, and Miller, we finally learned of Miller's connection to that story. If we were to transcribe all the shows, not just the ones on the SEC network, but everyone, how much real basketball was discussed versus the controversy over Miller not being suspended or his real role, his involvement. 90% at least in my mind of any conversation about the number one team in America, the overall number one seed, had zero to do about college basketball.
That's right.
And just about all to do with, my God, how can they allow this to happen and not suspend that kid?
To put it in perspective, I had the game literally the day after that news broke, and it was supposed to be just another Alabama game at South Carolina, Seth Greenberg and I. The news breaks less than 24 hours before tip-off the following day, immediately we had a sideline reporter. And immediately I'm getting inundated. Seth is getting inundated. Phone calls from everybody wanting to talk about what? The matchup? How good Alabama is? Can they finally make a Final Four? No. Talk about Brandon Miller. Talk about everything that happened in Tuscaloosa. And, I realize that's a story that transcends sports, but it also is a reminder that a lot of people, they're not in. It takes something like that for them to really have an interest to cover it, which is your point.
I'm sure you discovered how many more coordinating producers they had in Bristol.
Oh, yeah.
Prior to that game.
It was, again, if I ever write a book, there'll be certainly mention of those 24 hours for sure. And the funny thing is, I mean, it was an overtime thriller, and Miller goes for 41. It's the game of his life.
I did see the very end of the game. I was out on the road doing my own game, and I came back, and I think I caught the last maybe 2.5 minutes of the game. And it was very much in doubt because South Carolina played their butts off.
Played the game of their year.
Yeah, they did. But then it was when you guys went off the air and you went back to the studio, all right, there was very little basketball discussed in that studio that night.
That's what I mean. I assume
very little basketball. Yeah, I mean, and it's not their fault, but they've got to discuss it. I get that, and that there's more time, and there's more relevance for the studio to deal with that kind of story than you and Seth trying to call a game.
Well, yeah,
where some miraculous plays by him were being made. By the way.
And I'm getting hit on my Twitter timeline. How dare you be enthusiastic for that kid's 41 points? Do you know it? I'm not getting into that one. All right. So, by the way, this is an audio medium, but we're recording this on Zoom, Tim. That's a Florida Atlantic practice jersey, and I didn't just go out and buy this.
Beautiful. I love it.
So I played high school ball miles from the campus. 3 of my high school teammates went on to play at FAU right after they actually got a basketball program and eventually turned D1. And this was from a teammate of mine who I played with in middle school, high school, and he was a better player than I was, obviously, went on to play there. So that's like my team this year. That is one of those great stories in college basketball. And by the way, it got me to thinking, because shortly thereafter, FAU got football because of one man, Howard Schnellenberger. I mean, he was the guy. You probably interviewed Howard or came across him many times. You know what I learned? Just this is completely an aside. He's not in the College Football Hall of Fame, and I had to ask myself, well, why is that? There's a silly rule. Do you know this? So a coach must have coached at least 10 years and 100 games with a minimum winning percentage of 600. Now, I don't know where Howard falls short on that, but somehow he does. So I don't think he's ever getting in.
Probably the early days of FAU. Probably
that would have hurt his winning percentage. Sure. I mean, they were just they've got bake sales just to pay for the equipment. So anyway, it just got me to thinking, because I'm sure back in the Miami days, even you and Schnellenberger, you somehow crossed paths, right? I mean,
I got started really when Jimmy. My first game on ESPN was sidelines for South Carolina, Miami, when Testaverde was the Heisman Trophy, going to be the Heisman Trophy winner in '86.
Yeah, that's the first game I ever watched.
Wait, was that the fight?
The fight was the next year.
Next year. Okay. Todd Ellis was the quarterback for South Carolina. The man in black was the head coach.
Morrison.
And Jimmy at his absolute coiffed hair best at that particular time. But I did run across Coach Schnellenberger many times around then and after then through what he was doing and the job that he left Miami for, in the league, the USFL and all that other stuff that was, coming up. And I think he had also been part, I think, of the WFL going way back.
Yes.
So I was very aware of him, and that's where I really developed my relationship with Corso, with the Orlando Renegades.
The Renegades.
And '85 was my first year at ESPN, and my breakthrough year was that season. And those were great days. I mean, they were awesome, and I remember them vividly. And we'll write about it a lot in my book when I have it come out, which I think is still 2 years in the making. But
I was going to say yours will have a lot of chapters.
That'll be probably a doorstop for people around the country, because in all likelihood, like most guys that do what we do, I'll have to publish it myself probably. But I do want to get it out. I do, because so much of people will tell me the story after this or story after that, or they see an old picture, and it is a photographic memory. I just have to condense it, have a really good editor, and I do. A great guy is going to edit the book for me. So, but I wanted to get it out by 2025 because that'll be the 40th anniversary of my national debut when I started nationally.
Nice. And again, that'll be fascinating for the reasons I spoke of. No knock on the Hall of Fame announcers who did everything with one team or one network. Yeah. But if you want to really have a good story, there's got to be a little bit of adversity in there. There's got to be a little bit of peaks and valleys. It can't just all be we all would love to have the Vin Scully story, but that's not typically how broadcasting works.
I'll never forget doing Top Rank Boxing once. They asked me to do it, and they said, "Can you do boxing?" "Oh, of course I can." And they flew me out to some dingy hotel in Vegas. It was clearly one of the worst in Vegas at the time. And for years, Al Bernstein made those fighters sound like, they were the next, first or second challenge, should be the third rated heavyweight or cruiserweight or whatever. And some guy would bow out of a fight, and literally your homework for the event would be a questionnaire that would be given to the fighter.
Right.
And it's some ham and egger that they pulled off the streets that, maybe fought as an amateur years ago or in the service. And he has a bunch of tattoos, and he's got a truck, he's got a rig outside, but he's going to fight tonight because he gets to be on national cable.
That's fantastic.
One of those deals. That happened a lot back in the day. I mean, a lot.
I got one phone call.
We made it look as big as we could.
Oh, yeah. You lean on your
analyst,
right? I mean, you had Bernstein who could talk. I got a call like that. Mike, can you be in Jacksonville, North Carolina? I didn't even know there was such a thing. I guess it's a military-based town.
Yeah.
And you'd be working with who's the guy, the ESPN analyst, not Bernstein. For boxing.
Oh, it's for boxing. Okay.
This is for a boxing.
Might have been Teddy Atlas.
Atlas.
Teddy Atlas.
And I called my agent, and I'm like, I've never done boxing in my life. He's like, just lean on Atlas and just do it. And we couldn't make the travel work out. So I my boxing debut never took off. But I did get one of those phone calls. They probably called 37 other people. Like, call Morgan, see if he can do boxing for a night.
And this is just one weekend, and I'll stop and get off the nostalgia. But in 1985, in 1 week, all right, I did a Wednesday show in Hull, Quebec, Canada. Jean-Yves Thériault, who was the champion of his weight classification in PKA karate. Okay, it was run by a guy in Atlanta named Joe Corley, and Joe was also the analyst. So he fashioned himself as the Al Bernstein of kickboxing. So I do this show in Hull, Quebec, Canada on a Wednesday. I then fly to start Vegas I then fly to Memphis, because we've got a Showboats Birmingham Stallions TV game in the USFL. All right.
Reggie White versus Joe Cribbs.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to say Cliff Stout was the quarterback.
Cliff Stout, yep, former Steeler.
For the Stallions. And Joey Jones was wide receiver, by the way, on that team. That former coach, is he still at South Alabama? I don't think he is, but Joey later went on to coach at South Alabama. Anyway, I did that game on a Friday, and then from Memphis, drive to start Vegas to do Sunday night college baseball. And it's Thunder and Lightning, Will Clark and Rafael Palmeiro, and those guys going up against Skip Bertman's second-year team at LSU with Ben McDonald as a freshman, as I recall. So think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
5 days from Canada to the Delta,
That's awesome.
to do it was awesome. You can't, that doesn't happen anymore.
No.
That the calendar was, and that's the point. The calendar was so good to me, and there were so many new shows and new sports that ESPN had to put on the air because they had nothing else, and it just provided opportunity for me.
Right.
If you were going to work there, that was absolutely the best time to work there.
Well, yeah, and everything was so fresh because so many of those things weren't televised in the past. I mean, that was the birth of college baseball on TV, and the USFL had their 3-year run, and I mean,
Marv Levy was actually an analyst with me on USFL football.
Wow.
He had become the general manager of the Chicago Blitz or Chicago Fire, whatever it was. I think it was the Blitz.
Yeah.
I think it was the Blitz. But anyway, they were going to suspend operations with that team. They had by 85. The league would die later that year, with the lawsuit and Trump and all that. But Marv Levy, before he became a Hall of Fame coach with the Bills, he had already done Kansas City. Then he went to the USFL, and then he came back to coach Buffalo and become a Hall of Famer. But I got to work with Marv 3 or 4 times, and that was like being with an Al McGuire in basketball.
That's incredible.
Marv's a legend.
Oh,
Absolute
heck yeah.
legend.
One of the brightest people that have probably ever coached the sport.
Yeah.
And I've said this many times on the podcast. I mean, I was a weird kid. So when the USFL was around, I mean, I was literally like less than 10. I was watching those games when I was like 8 years old.
Hey, JC, don't you think you should edit that out? Don't you think you could edit that part?
It's not about proving youth as much as it is like I wonder when I see today's kids now, sometimes I worry a little bit about not only our industry, but just kind of the future of sports fans, because it wasn't unusual for kids even that young. I mean, a little unusual, but then when I got to like 10, 11, 12, we all were sports fanatics and we all watched sports all the time and played it. And that was just normal. You had like the kids that got in a bunch of trouble, and then you had the kids that were just immersed in sports, and it was the perfect escape. I don't know if we have that as much anymore.
No, we don't.
It seems, I mean, I'd be a little bit concerned about that. We're doing all this gimmicky stuff like TikTok and everything to try to get them into sports. But if you're not actually watching games, that's a concern to me, because if you're not watching them early, what's going to all of a sudden change that you're watching them late, right? Like if you're a teenager and you don't care to watch sports or listen to sports or attend sports, then what makes you think you're going to do it at 35, 45, 50? I think that's the challenge that all these leagues and college football and basketball have.
No doubt about it.
Everybody,
no doubt about it.
So circling back a minute to the Final Four before we get into some football stuff, which we always do on this podcast. One thing that stood out, I mentioned FAU, and then we've got San Diego State. I mean, this is just UConn's the one blue blood. Last year we had 4 blue bloods. This year we have one. We have 3 other teams that have never been to a Final Four. We have no 1, 2, or 3 seeds, all historic. And already there's the criticism trained by people that don't care about college basketball in the first place, going, well, good luck having me watch because I only care when the blue. Well, good for you, but there's other people that actually will enjoy this. But one thing I thought, just an overriding to tie it in with football just a second, Tim, is that what we're witnessing is something that will never happen in college football. I don't care if 12-team playoff, which thankfully we're going to have, but you're never going to have this. And the biggest reason, there's a lot of reasons, but college basketball, the benefit of the one and done in terms of parity is that all these teams that are in the Final Four, they're old. There's 2 other numbers I'm going to throw at you. 0 McDonald's All-Americans are left. First Final Four without a single McDonald's All-American, and you won't find one true freshman that's playing any quality minutes for any of these 4 schools. So the old teams, whether it was Baylor a few years ago, Virginia, they are the ones, other than 2012 Kentucky, 2015 Duke, which were predominantly led by freshmen. These veteran teams are the ones that are cutting down the nets in March and in early April. In football, you have to stay minimum 3 years, so there are no one and done. So a Nick Saban or a Kirby Smart, he's going to keep that stuff. Bowers could have been in the NFL 2 years ago, the tight end for Georgia.
Right.
Anderson from Alabama could have been in the NFL a year or two ago, the linebacker. But in the football, the NFL doesn't want 19-year-olds in their sport. So we're not getting away from the top of the top dominating the landscape in football, but we still have the true Cinderella story in basketball. Your thoughts, just one observation.
Well, it's a recession-proof event. I don't care who's in the Final Four, it will still get a certain number.
Yes.
When I say number, I mean rating. Now, I guarantee you the problem with college basketball in a lot of respects is much of the media has great disdain for college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
They will tell you what's wrong with it long before they'll tell you what's good about it. And that's got to be what you hear all week leading up to Houston. Okay. Oh my God. Does anybody really care about this Final Four? Columnists will be writing that.
Right.
And it'll be because they haven't taken the time. Okay. Just haven't taken the time to see the stories that are at FAU, the stories that are at San Diego State. Did you know that Brian Dutcher's dad, Jim Dutcher, coached some really good Minnesota teams? Did you know the role he played in recruiting the Fab Five for Steve Fisher? Nobody wants to do that. It's a lazy ass media that says, I'm not interested. Therefore, you fans probably shouldn't be interested either. That's what's going to happen. Guaranteed. That's what you're going to read and hear from most people that are outside the college basketball circle that you and I reside in. And I think JC does too, because of his background. The bottom line is this isn't for you, Mr. Columnist at Big Website. It's not for you, Colin Coward. Okay. It's not for you, Pat Forty, if you're not happy with the 4 teams that are in. I'm trying to give examples from different areas.
Oh yeah.
I like all those guys, respect their opinions. But the bottom line is they're going to tell you what's wrong before they tell you what's right most of the time.
Right.
Not all, but most of the time. And to me, this is exactly the fly in the ointment special that I've always wanted for a Final Four. I think it's fantastic.
Right.
Now, I'd love to discuss further whether San Diego State shouldn't have been forced to play another 5 minutes to get to Houston, because I think they should have.
Right.
But the bottom line is they're there, and I'm going to celebrate the fact that they're there. The Mountain West Conference was a better league top to bottom than the Pac-12 was. Arizona and UCLA were better, but everybody else in that league stunk out loud. So the Mountain West deserves their moment in the sun. Houston got taken down by a Miami team that had great skilled players, a lot of transfers, but a lot of skilled players. And Jim Larinaga, my God, this is a guy from yesteryear that was part of Terry Holland, God rest his soul, Terry Holland's staff for my first game that I did between Virginia and Duke, January 5th, 1985. He and Seth Greenberg was a GA, and he and Dave Odom were the primary assistants to Terry Holland.
That's right.
And look at what he's done now, over a period of 5 decades, really. And if you know him well enough, he's still a great, he's an Archbishop Malloy guy from the Bronx, New York. And he'll go on and on about stories about the guys that he played for. And I love basketball people like that have such a zest for life. And I've done a number of tournaments. In fact, the last one I did 10 years ago in Austin, I didn't know it would be my last, but it was. And Jimmy made the Sweet 16 from there. And he had a transfer point guard. It kind of came out of nowhere. They were just coming out of those NCAA sanctions that hit both the football and the basketball program. He can assemble teams and put together nomads and have them buy in and have chemistry quicker than just about anybody in the business. I think the other one that's great at that is Ed Cooley, who did it at Providence this year, and I think will do a great job at Georgetown. But those kinds of stories that we just love, most of our colleagues in media, particularly those that opine more than report, are going to be telling us why we shouldn't be interested. And that's a shame.
Well, yeah, and so many of the people that cover it on that landscape ignore it for much of the year. When I say ignore it, they're not watching games on a Wednesday night or a Saturday. They write the obligatory column that they have to do, and they find some type. I mean, it's beautiful the way they craft it. I mean, we saw this during COVID. It's like, how do I really discuss what I want to discuss here on this planet, even though I'm supposed to discuss there on that planet? I got to find a way to bridge that gap and they do it. And it's a skill. I mean, I commend them for it. It's not what I necessarily want to read, but, and I don't think they're serving the true fan. And this is where, again, it just becomes kind of lazy. Like, I don't want to have to cover the sport and truly watch games and study players. And if they're not one and done NBA lottery picks, why do I care? Well, you should care. It's part of the job. And a lot of the people out there that care about these schools and teams actually do care.
Well, look, UConn may come out there and blow everybody away because, they may not have any McDonald's high school All-Americans, but they got great recruits that are really good, and they're going to have pro careers. Jordan Hawkins will be a mid-first round pick. Okay, he will. He'll be a mid to late first round pick. Caravan, the outstanding freshman, is going to have, I think, a tremendous career at the next level. The other big that I think that people are talking about more in the NBA is Klingon, the backup, the 7'2" kid out of Bristol, Connecticut. They have two of everything. So, if they win their game and it's by a large margin, I'm not going to be shocked. But one thing about the Final Four we know to be true, there are 3 games that are going to be played. And out of those 3 games in those 2 days, Saturday and Monday, something epic is going to happen. It always does. I think the last time we had a really bad Final Four was after the tournament had been tremendous in 2011 with a bunch of buzzer beaters. I had the Butler doing it again and again in the first 2 rounds. They were an 8-9 team, and they were getting Stevens back to the Final Four for a second straight year. And this was after they lost Hayward to the NBA. This was the team minus Hayward. But they couldn't find the ocean in that game with UConn and got blown out. They, in turn, had blown out VCU and UConn. Well, that was the last time we really had a bad game where the bad games all around. Every other year, we've always gotten one epic game out of the 3. And I think this year, UConn's going to be pushed by somebody. I would anoint them the favorite. But, one of these teams is going to have a moment in time that we'll be talking about forever. And I'm just happy that it's either going to be a Mountain West team or a Conference USA team. These guys, they've earned it, and they deserve the support they're getting and the interest that I'm certainly going to give.
Without question. I mean, I can't remember the last time I missed a Final Four game, period. And I'm certainly not going to bow out on this one because you don't have 4 blue bloods. If you enjoy the game, you enjoy the game, and you brought up a good point.
Even the UConn story is a little bit of a return to glory. They were, the coach with the most pressure in this Final Four is Hurley,
right?
But he also had a hell of a lot of pressure when the tournament began,
right?
Because he had not gotten past the second game. He had been bounced early since coming in, and when they moved back from the American to the Big East, there was pressure on them to deliver because the school was going to take a financial bath getting away from college football, getting that 7 to 10 million per that they were getting for playing football.
Yeah, I mean, UConn as a whole was in the abyss, and I've talked about this before. I actually had them in the Myrtle Beach Bowl with Jim Mora, and just to get to a bowl game, I mean, it looked like they were just going to quit football altogether. It was a dumpster fire on top of a dumpster fire, and then football, I think, is on the rise with Coach Mora, and obviously basketball. I agree with you; they're the favorite, and I think you brought up a good point, and then we'll pivot to football, is that just because there's not McDonald's All-Americans out there, there are pros on the floor. You're going to see pros out there. And the way a lot of these teams are constructed, like UConn, like Miami, if they're not getting McDonald's All-Americans, they're getting those guys that are like number 40 to 75 in the top 100 kid. And
Right.
if you have those guys and they're old and they're juniors and seniors, they can beat any team full of McDonald's All-Americans, and more often they're simply the better team. So
that's true.
That to circle back to the original point.
Villanova was that way. If
Right.
you looked at Villanova's team, both teams, the 16 team and the 18 team, okay, and the teams that they were winning against to claim national championships, certainly the epic game with Carolina. I was doing ACC games back then too, with Raycom, and I did obviously the Fox games with Villanova. My God, there are 10 guys on two of my boards that are stalwart NBA players now. But Villanova was the team that people were struggling with being a blue blood now. Okay, are they really 85? When after they got the second one in 3 years, I think they became the blue blood, and that's kind of where UConn is in their world. They're trying to become Villanova 2.0,
right?
Okay, for the Big East. So,
and they've got a huge enrollment
to where you are.
Yeah. I mean, UConn's got a huge enrollment. Like people are like, well, who's going to show up? I guarantee there's going to be plenty of Connecticut fans.
Big time.
I know a couple of them. One of them is a former boss of mine who's going to be there.
Media will be there too. The media requests from the NCAA.
That's right.
Connecticut. Oh my God.
Yeah. And by the way, I have to say, I've heard this 100 times already. FAU, a little small school in Boca, it's a massive campus with a huge enrollment. There's really nothing small about it. The gym is small, a gym which I used to shoot around in because it seats about 3,700, but nothing about FAU in general is really small. Anyway, all right. Since you mentioned San Diego State, which, by the way, if the Pac-12 is not on the phone trying to close that deal with San Diego State now, I don't know what it's going to take. But let's talk about the Pac, as JC mentioned, and we've talked about this on this podcast before. We all have our roots. We all have our roots in Southern football, I guess you could say, but we all love the big picture product. In other words, I've never looked at this as I'm really fond of this league and I have roots in this league, so therefore I want everybody else to be destroyed. This is not like we're not running a fast food empire. We want everybody to be healthy and vibrant. So I look at what's going on with the Pac-12 situation, and I've mentioned this before, Tim. It's almost like at times you hear somebody saying everything's fine, everything's okay, and it's like the guy's playing the violin on the Titanic as it's going submerged in the water. Like, no, everything's not fine. This is a really important time if you're going to survive as a Power 5, relevant league. What do you think's going to happen there? Let's talk about Colorado going to the Big 12, which would make a lot of sense to me. Where do you think this all ends up?
Well, we were throwing a little bit of a curveball last week when the Arizona president made this statement when he was asked. I'm not sure exactly where he was. It was some summit where people of his ilk were on hand, and a number of media types were supposedly going to be covering it. And the Arizona president, I think, even reached out to a few media people that are covering it on a daily basis. I want to say I first saw it from maybe Stu. Might have been Stu in The Athletic that wrote it first, and I saw it. And then I heard some other people writing, and I read some other people that wrote about it as well. He made this grandiose statement that they would have a deal that would eclipse the Big 12 deal. Well, the Big 12 deal is by far and away the third best deal in college football. It's new members and members remaining from the Oklahoma-Texas period, okay, are going to be making, I think it's between $7 and $8 million more annually than they were making in the league with Texas and Oklahoma in it. So that's 41, 42 million annually for Big 12 schools. Well, if the Pac-12 is going to get that, and they're going to get that with streaming companies being your bell cow, well, they might get to that number, Mike. They could. And if they do, God bless you. But you're not going to have many eyeballs. You're not going to have nearly as many eyeballs on your product while you're patting your wallet saying, look at us, we're making however many million more than the Big 12. I don't think that matters very much if people are hunting in trying to find you. You already are hard to catch
right.
with deals with ESPN and Fox. I'm not going to speak for anyone in my company that's in the business of procuring rights, but I'm just going to say what I read. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And what I read is Fox isn't interested.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also read is ESPN may or may not be interested. Okay. That's what I'm reading
That's right.
from the people in Sports Business Journal and beyond. So Amazon or Apple are going to have to, bring the Brinks armored truck, to George Kliavkov's palace, wherever it is. I know it's not in Santa Clara anymore. He moved it, someplace, wherever he lives, drop off that money. And then hopefully, I can't imagine that they would not have a deal either with ESPN in some capacity on their linear networks for late at night, or that they would maybe ESPN Plus, because I know that streaming thing for them is a really big deal. Maybe they'd be interested in putting some Pac-12 games on there too.
Well, that window is open.
They would have to have
that TV window is open for somebody, Tim.
Yeah, it is.
So
I mean, but if your lead show pony is streaming financially, that's good, but it's not going to help you with your obscurity from fans and media, and yes, even those that are trying to find you that might be on the committee. You're in a world of hurt, and meanwhile, Brett Yormark is sitting over there waiting to see what they're going to do, all the while chirping to Colorado, to Utah, to the Arizona schools. Hey, if you're really not happy with that, my guess, I don't think he would have any problem at all, nor would the other ADs or school presidents have a problem with anybody else wanting to come into the league. Because if that were to happen, that would only make, in my mind, the Big 12 a bigger player as the third most influential football conference in America, which I believe is what Yormark's task in his own mind is, to solidify the Big 12 as the next best. And remember, the Big 12 has interest, it has viability, great coaches, really good players. They don't have media markets. They don't have major media markets. They have DFW area, okay, they got TCU, and that really helps them a lot, help them get the deal that they got. But they don't have, beyond that, Stillwater, Oklahoma, and places like that, Manhattan, Kansas, those are not big media markets. Even Kansas City is not big. It's not, in terms of being a major mega media market. So if teams like San Diego State or Colorado with Boulder and Denver and Arizona and Arizona State with Phoenix, and if those teams became available, that would only make their deal worth that much more.
And you're already adding Houston and Orlando, speaking of media markets,
which were huge gets. Absolutely.
I thought the Big 12,
Cincinnati as well.
And Cincinnati.
And BYU has an international following.
That's right. Well, heck, they got their own TV network.
They do.
Like BYU's got a major fan base.
I said this before, and a lot of my friends were shouting me down, especially my old SEC friends who look upon me as, Benedict Arnold these days. but I'm sorry, but BYU is a big deal.
Absolutely.
Getting BYU on your schedule. There's a reason why Ole Miss did a home and home with them. There's a reason. There's a reason, because it's good business to play a non-conference game against them. I would suggest you might want to play 2-for-1 and not 1-for-1. But BYU is a big get. And the bottom line is the Big 12 had no problem with the Church of Latter-day Saints. The people in the Pac-12 did.
Right.
Okay. So you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow in this business.
I look at this and obviously it was a gut punch for the Big 12 to lose Texas and Oklahoma. Nobody saw that coming, just as the Pac did not see Southern Cal and UCLA defecting for the Big 10. You didn't see that coming, right? These moves happened kind of almost in the middle of the night. But the difference is, whatever setbacks the Big 12 has had over the years, this going back to the previous commissioners, I think they've done the very best they can to patch up the
Absolutely.
hole and move forward and even progress.
Yeah.
I can't say that about the Pack.
Right. Much credit has to go to Bob Bowlesby, who, even when he knew he was out, okay, did all of the grunt work on those teams he wanted to bring in.
Right.
Before Yormark got there.
Right.
So, and now he's delivered to Brett Yormark something he can promote.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his DNA, is promoting. Right. And but Bob Bowlesby was always a really good, solid football man. The Big 12 got itself into trouble because they all placated, all of them, and even past commissioners, okay, placated to Texas. And it was like they were as if they were down on their knees, genuflecting, okay, to Texas. Please stay, okay. And it got tiresome. It really did. But that's not happening anymore. And I think equal payment is for everybody involved is going to be a really big thing for them. I think they're extraordinarily happy, the membership of the Big 12 now.
How excited are you, not to completely bypass 2023, but let's think about 2024. Mm-hmm. The Big 10 with Southern Cal and UCLA, the SEC with Oklahoma and Texas, and a 12-team playoff. I mean,
that's going to be great,
right? This has got to be one of the biggest banner years in the history of our beloved sport.
Yeah. And, what we're doing here by having the playoff expansion take place a year before it had to take place. And I'll make this prediction for you guys right now. This is, ESPN is the lone rights holder of the playoff with 4. It'll be the lone proprietor with 12 first time around. Mm-hmm. What this is basically is a snapshot season. It's almost like when the ACC adopted the 3-point shot for the regular season in '83, but the tournament didn't get it until '85, I think it was, or maybe later, 86, 87. Yeah. So, but you remember how Valvano used the 3-point shot with Wittenberg and Lowe and those guys just to win enough games,
right?
And then, of course, and they did not have it in the ACC tournament, by the way. Still won it and got to the NCAAs. But this is going to be a test season for the 12-team playoff. And what by that I mean, the new contract is being negotiated now for a multi-network deal, which will happen, I believe. The multi-network deal will happen, mm-hmm. And whether it's the company I work for or somebody else, there will be more than one network involved when we have the new contract. I think that's pretty much a given. All of the major players have kind of shaken their heads and said, yeah, that's where we're going. I've not heard anything to suggest that I'm wrong when I make that statement. Mm-hmm. After we do 12 and they see the boomerang of all this, that we now have, like in basketball, a 3-week event that has the 5 playing the 12 and the 6 playing the 11, and there's home fields for the first round. I think what they're going to discover is, and television people, no matter if they work in Connecticut and their overlords are in Burbank or they're in LA and their lot is in Century City, wherever it is, okay, they're going to, all the money people, all the suits are going to come forward and they're going to tell the people, do you know how much more money you'd make if you had 1, 2, 3, and 4 playing against 13, 14, 15, and 16 that opening week? It's all about inventory. And the more inventory you give to sports television, the more television is going to give you. And I believe we'll see 16 teams in this thing by the time the new television contract is signed.
Which
I
is
believe they're
off.
going to 12 now. No, it's right around the corner.
Yeah.
This is going to it now, in time for a college football season in 20. Technically, it's happening in 25. We've got the new conferences. We've got 4 to go through again. But once we get to 12, I think we're looking at 3 years. We're looking at the 26th season when I believe we'll have 16 teams. I really believe that.
I would not be shocked. I mean, I'm just happy with 12.
I am too.
No,
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I'm happy with 12 too.
Right.
And if they choose to say no, 1, 2, 3, and 4 keeps the regular season as important as it needs to be, so they've earned an off date.
Mm-hmm.
If that would be what they would use as their excuse not to do it.
Yeah.
But once they find out, these presidents find out how much more money is in the cookie jar.
Oh, sure.
By allowing, and you're not adding on to the calendar at all. You're just making sure teams 1, 2, 3, and 4 are playing at home in games against teams 13, 14, 15, and 16. It's
right.
It's that simple.
You have to think this too, Tim. Athletic directors and fan bases, right? All right. So say you're a top 4 seed like Alabama. You know, their fans already consistently complain about neutral site games and want more home games on campus. So, you know, they go through, they win the SEC and they're undefeated, but they don't get a home playoff game.
Right.
At Bryant-Denny, but number 5 does, you know?
Exactly.
So I could see that, because that's one thing I'm very curious about is like, okay, so you're giving these teams buys, but my understanding is it's going straight to the bowls. So teams with lesser accomplishments will actually be hosting playoff games, whereas teams that get the bye will not. So I think that's something. And you want to talk about money? I mean, on campus home playoff game is going to be legendary. So
oh my God, yeah. And by the way, the notion that a 14, 15, or 16 couldn't upset one of them not being real in today's world. Come on, not after what we saw last year with TCU and Michigan. I mean, after what we saw with TCU and Michigan, how's anybody going to think that the potential of a team that's ranked 14th or 15th that maybe got hot, won 4 or 5 of their last 6 games, can't knock off a number 4 team at home? I think the potential is there. It really is. Even
beneath that, I heard way too much of, oh, well, you know, when is the number 8 team ever going to beat it? I mean, look, once you get past the way that the super team is of the year is, whether it's Georgia the last couple of years or Alabama before that, or LSU had its one, you know, super team year. But once you get past that team, the rest of that field, I don't even think I would call it a major upset if, you know, the 10 beats a 3 or what. I know my numbers are off here, but you get the idea. Like, I don't think I think there'll be plenty of quote unquote upsets in that 12 team playoff. And
here's the other thing. With all the money that's there from NIL and with the portal doing what the portal does, and that's I know another topic, but that we can get to, but we're going to see more staying power for the players, a greater identity for the fans with those players and the teams. You know, we talked a little bit about the basketball tournament having a lot of teams that are there because they're older. They may not be as skilled, but they're older. They have got great chemistry and all that. Well, we're going to see that happen with more teams in the so-called non-power conference areas. Okay. And I think that if a player is making in excess of $1.5 million, okay, and he's living in a college town and he's got choices, gee, am I going to play for that weak-ass Carolina Panthers team, or am I going to get to play here at home on a potential national championship team, and I'll still be able to rake in about $1.5 million or $2 million? I think I might stay in school another year.
Yeah.
That's going to start happening here. And guys my age they get real tired of hearing about money, but money to the players is going to help the college game and its level of interest mightily. I mean, it is, because players now have some options, and I've got no issue if the coaches are making millions, the universities are making bazillions, and those. I mean, one less Niagara Falls inside the football offices in Tuscaloosa, and more money going to the players is okay with me.
One less slide at Clemson land for Dabo and the players to slide down, and maybe a little fewer toppings at the ice cream bar for some of these athletic departments.
UCF's building a lazy river. The Knights are building a lazy
I do
river,
like that.
So.
I think that ought to be mandatory.
I like that idea. I like that for like Southern campuses and stuff.
That should be part of D1 status. right?
maybe put a Chuck E. Cheese on the island.
There you go.
around the lazy river. A Chuck E. Cheese goes in
Chuck
there.
E.
Every
Cheese.
semester you get so many tokens, and you get to play as many video games as you want.
Hey, some of these players have kids. You got to have a little park for it.
Got to have a little fun. No, look, I've said this before, and I know we don't want to go knee deep in NIL, but I've never been anti compensation for players. I do think we've got to have a little bit of structure to it, and right now we have none.
No, and the way to go about it is what they're trying to do. It's going to be a little harder without one party controlling both the House and the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll get there in a couple of years. I don't know, but maybe we will. But we need congressional help on this to get some unifying of structure so that one state doesn't have such a big advantage over another state. Okay. Mm-hmm. And it's regions of the country have a lot to do with this. In the SEC, we were ready made in this part of the country for NIL. I mean, we were ready made for it. It had been going on for years illegally anyway. So we're ready to go.
Right.
Legally.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
We are.
Sure.
And people know that. And even people here know that. And that's good for the Southeastern Conference. But when you go to other parts of the country, Mike, to do games, and you ask, and I'm talking at prominent universities, okay, you ask a coach about their NIL, and he's like, well, I'm the NIL. I put the whole thing together. Well, he had to do it by himself because there wasn't enough interest from alumni or anybody that he knew that he could trust. So he said, I'll control it. And he would get some people next to him to help him coordinate it and put it together.
Right.
So it's going on in other places, but the size of it is not nearly as large, and it's not structured, with the university having basically replaced their compliance people with their NIL collectibles people.
That's right.
That's kind of what's gone on at the preeminent big state schools in college places, not just the SEC, but certainly in the Big Ten and the Big 12. I think the structure is pretty good. But when you get to each coast, if the coach doesn't take it, the bull by the horns, he's going to be left behind. So it's basically a blue state, red state thing. If you're a red state, you have your act together on NIL. If you're a blue state, you're trying to, round up the support, round up the business people to see it the way you see it so that your team can compete at the level that the coach believes the alumni base would want. And
as usually is the case, the people that have the least interest in college athletics succeeding have the most adamant viewpoints on NIL and how there shouldn't be any guardrails and everybody's a victim and we should do. And really it's always like a hot take and nobody really argues that intelligently against it. And then it just gets out there in the universe and it's like, well, wait a minute. What are we actually talking about here? What do we, let's think this through practically. Because if we're going to admit it's a business, well, then all great businesses have to have some structure to it. We don't just throw stuff up in the air and say, well, this is the way it should be. Anyway, a couple quick hitters.
Yeah, it's mostly blue. I was going to say mostly blue, how blue states and red states and the different parties view labor, and having lived in both, it's dramatically different. And there's good and bad in both. I think one is more pro-independent business and one is more pro-worker. And so if you're hardcore pro-worker and you want 50% of the revenue for your workers, that's obviously a different deal than if you're in a state that just kind of believes in entrepreneurship and says, okay, go make as much as you want, but you're not getting any of this. And so it's going to be an interesting debate, not to get too political once it gets to that thing. And I think Charlie Baker, a moderate Republican from Massachusetts that got elected governor there. If anybody can do it, this guy probably can.
Absolutely. That's the best thing that they could have done is hire a guy that was a Republican in as blue a state as you could get to deal with what he had to deal with as a governor. He is absolutely fits the profile of what the NCAA needed. Now, whether he can do it, with the lack of power that the NCAA has. Maybe he can get I think the biggest problem right now, fellas, and I like all these guys, but I've got the biggest problem I have is when was it just after COVID when the commissioners of all the conferences were at odds with one another, or was it? I mean, they obviously were they were pissed off at each other in the closet before they came out of the closet with how mad they were after COVID, and now it almost seems one will do in the other just because. And if not for the president of Mississippi State, I'm trying to remember his name now. The president of Mississippi State.
Oh, you got me on that.
Yeah, he was the president that stepped forward and said, enough. This is enough. You guys get together, get in a room, and by God, figure it out.
Yeah.
Mark Keenum.
Yes, Mark Keenum.
Mark Keenum.
He stepped up. Other presidents got their voices out. And that's when the commissioners felt, okay, y'all want to experiment with 12? We'll go ahead and do it.
Mm-hmm.
The people ask, how did that happen? And this is the presidents, okay, who used to get blamed for everything and normally probably deserved it. This guy steps up, other people listen, and now all of a sudden some commissioners are actually talking again cordially that maybe weren't, 2 years ago at the Final Four. Bowlesby and Sankey are walking out pissed off. And those two were at odds, obviously, over the OU Texas thing, but yet they were on the same side when it came to what we needed to do, what was in the best interest of college football. And so I'm glad to see presidents like this gentleman that Keenum needed. We needed a no-nonsense, common sense guy to step up that's the president of a university. And so I think the outlook is brighter than people, I think the vast majority believe.
Yeah, I think it's healthier now. There's a concern out there that might be legit, and we just sung the praises of all the good things the Big 12 has done, considering that the two heavyweights that they're going to lose. But there is a concern when you look at 2014, what the Big 10 is going to add, what the SEC is going to add, what their TV contracts are going to look like, what everybody else's TV contract is going to look like. You sit there and we both know they're both chock full of blue bloods and facilities and fan bases and TV markets and everything else. How in the heck can any of these other conferences truly compete with the SEC and the Big Ten come 2024?
No, I think the bottom line is the way you have to do it is by getting those, and I've seen them at every level. You see a place like Coastal Carolina that did what it did and had the right guy to lead them to the promised land, first in baseball, then in football. It can be done, all right? And you see other examples. The Boise State example from the BCS era, how they built their enrollment, how they became something from an academic standpoint far better than what they had been before, largely because of the success of their athletics program. To have people that are presidents of universities that understand how you take the collaboration of strong in athletics can lead to stronger academics and vice versa. That happens. And these schools at that level have to come to terms with that. At small Louisiana Monroe, okay, when I was in school, it was a directional school, Northeast Louisiana. Now it's a hyphen school. But for the first time, they have a president who understands that collaboration and knows that he's got to pay a little more for a guy like Bowden. And he's got to pay a little more for some assistants so he can have a chance to compete. That's a program that I think has been probably last in funding, last in budget, and yet it's creeping back up. And you got to keep doing that. You got to keep rallying, and you got to keep getting more and more people that maybe in the past were not had the money, the old money, that they were not going to give up. Now you got to find a way to convince them to become donors to your program. And there are other examples, but that's the one that hits closest to me because of where I'm from and where I live. But there are examples nationally. I think Coastal Carolina most recently and Boise State when we began the BCS era are the two shining examples. Think about Utah prior to Pac-12 as a Mountain West school.
Sure.
TCU prior to Big 12 as a Mountain West school.
Mm-hmm.
There are tremendous examples of people that started ponying up. I'm telling you, if you go to TCU, yeah, it may have 45,000 instead of 100.
Oh,
but that 45,000 is jam packed. It's happy, and the donors that are getting those suites,
yeah,
they're putting in money like you would not believe.
Well, you and I have both done games.
Absolutely not believe.
You and I have both done games at that stadium. If you haven't been in the founders room, right?
Oh my God!
What is it? 6 of those suites that go for millions. I've never seen anything like it. They got money.
You had to have it. Had to be the founders deal was limited to maybe, I think it was maybe 6 or 9. Some number like that.
Right.
And it was the number, I think, was right around 25 million. 25.
That's how they raised all the money for the stadium. Yeah.
And that was
10 years ago. Cause I did my first game there right around the time that happened.
And since then they finished that other side now. So it is an epic stadium.
It's incredible.
And on the outside, it still looks, like it was constructed when it was constructed. Then you go inside and it's off the charts modern and just fantastic. So I think that other schools in conferences the size of the Sun Belt, of the Mountain West, they have a chance to compete. They know it, but they're going to have to do a lot of it with their own lead work. They've got to do it. They got to grind it. And you'll see there'll be more examples like Coastal and like Boise State in the future.
Well, the beautiful thing is
there. It's a question of tapping into that money.
The beautiful thing of it too is much like, if you go to the Final Four, whether or not you win a game there, you're hanging a banner because that's a historic year. If you're a Sun Belt school and you get to the 12-team playoff, that is forever a historic year that'll be celebrated a century from now, whether you win the title or not.
Yeah. And by the way, with the American losing who they lost, and I'm a big fan and friend of Mike Oresco's, I'll be sitting right next to he and his wife Sharon with my wife this weekend. Wonderful people. I go back to his days at ESPN and mine, and then his days at CBS and mine. We go back that far. If you noticed, all the teams he got to replace Cincinnati and UCF and Houston, they're all big market schools. Mm-hmm. They're all in good sized markets. Now, it's going to take a while for them to get up to speed with what's left, being Memphis and other schools that are still left in the American. But he's right. We do not have to have, nor should we ever say again, Power 5, Group of 5. It's Division I college football. Let's stop labeling these schools based on what the media perception here is, Mm-hmm. Because teams can come from conferences like that. The Sun Belt right now, because of their new membership and the old membership that's still there, in my mind, has moved ahead of the American in football.
Agreed.
Because of the overall talent they have and the recruiting base that they can get their players from. The American, which has clearly been the best of the so-called non-Power 5, they've got a growing period now ahead of them for about, I think, probably 2 to 3 years at least. But the comforting thought for Mike Oresco and all the other commissioners is, well, we've got 12 now, so you can't say we don't have a chance.
That's right.
We have a chance.
You're at the table.
And so when you start your practices in August, your fall camps, you can say, let's go have something special happen. We too can do what, maybe no one thought TCU could do last year. Okay. Right. And that's another big thing. I don't care how badly Georgia beat TCU. Okay. They still beat Michigan and they got to the championship game.
It's huge.
And that helps the Big 12. It helped Brett Yormark with his TV deal. It'll continue to help them. And I think it'll help all of those schools and conferences that right now we put in that god-awful position of Group of 5. I think it's Division I college football. And I think it's being really unfair if we say otherwise now. I really do.
They've got a seat at the table. Tim, you always have a seat at our table here on JC and Morgan. As always, you knock it out of the park. That's why you're the lone member of the distinguished 3-time member of JC and Morgan podcast. Only one person could be first. You climb that mountain before anybody else. Really, we appreciate the time just flies by because we're just talking. And you always have very compelling thoughts to say, and it always comes from a standpoint of credibility, which is important to us. Enjoy your off season. I'm sure we'll chat again before too long. And as always, we thank you so much for the time.
You too, fellas. Great, Mike. Thank you. And JC, great talking to you as well. I'm here anytime for you. If you want to make it a fourth, just give me a buzz before the start of the football season.
The contract says, the contract says at least 5. I don't know if you read the fine print. So you're already under contract for at least 2 more of these suckers. We'll get you in there for sure. Tim, again, thank you so much, and please stay in touch. Good stuff as always from Tim Brando, again, of Fox Sports, formerly of ESPN, of CBS, of Raycom, of Sports Radio World, of the Braves, and of the Falcons. That, my friends, is a career. And again, what I mentioned, we've been fortunate to have really good guests on here. We don't want anybody on here who doesn't want to be on here. I'm not twisting anybody's arm to give us even a half hour. Tim always gives us more than that. Yeah. But if you enjoy talking ball like we do and talking about the future of our beloved sport of football, and in this case, some basketball as well, then we want our doors open. And Tim is taking advantage of that and always does a great job.
Yeah, love the fact he's done all kinds of different things that I appreciate. And that South Carolina Miami game, I remember I was 9 years old, Mike, and we had one of those big screen TVs that you pulled the projector out of upstairs. And South Carolina just happened to be opening against Miami that year, first game of the season, first game for Todd Ellis, who we all remember. Most of our audience knows. Miami beat them pretty good that night, but I do remember Timmy B was the sideline guy. I think Kevin Kiley and Ron Franklin may have been.
Oh, Kiley! Wow,
Kevin Kiley, man.
Yeah.
So anyway, heck of a.
Kiley would go on to do NFL on TNT, and then Franklin, who I've heard a million stories of from people at ESPN that I work with now that used to work with Ron. They're all over the map. We'll leave it at that. But in terms of in the South popularity, play-by-play voices, Ron is right up there. Ron is so much of what Southern football fans like in their play-by-play guys.
He had a little Keith Jackson to him, a little Keith to him.
Yeah, smooth as silk on the voice and not over the top and just Franklin was one of the best when it came to that, for sure. As always, speaking of one of the best, the very best when it comes to jeans and other accessories, Blue Delta, BlueDeltaJeans.com. Check them out. You will not find a more comfortable, better looking, long-lasting pair of jeans on the planet. And again, they're custom to your shape, not to theirs. And you can have that customization done. You have to go to a department store to do it. You can do it online and have them shipped to your door. It's BlueDeltaJeans.com. Tell them Mike and JC have sent you. I was amazed. I keep hearing from people time and time again who have heard our ads on that and have actually become Blue Delta customers. I mean, that's kind of the point, but it's just always good to hear that. So appreciate those of you that have reached out to me and told me that. Some other people reached out to me, JC, in closing about how much they've enjoyed the Remote Droppers, the movie segment that we do at the end. We're not going to do that today because of time, but I've had a couple people get on me about not seeing Uncle Buck all the way through. That's my bad. I've seen every other John Hughes movie and love them all, and I love John Candy. It just slipped through the cracks. I don't know what to tell you, but I will get to that at some point in time. All right. JC, hope you enjoyed your vacation. It's good to have you back. And sure. We're doing another one this week. We're going to talk to Matt Chernoff of 680 The Fan, who's been doing sports talk radio in the mecca of college football for over 20 years. And I know he's got a lot of thoughts on the subject. So we'll drop this and then we'll drop that and then we'll get back at it next week. And we just keep rocking and rolling. There is no off season on JC and Morgan. So that will do it for us. For JC, it's Mike saying so long, and we'll see you soon again on JC and Morgan.